So let's get started with session number 2. How many of you really liked the way this session was presented? The elephant and the geopolitical chessboard. Feels very, very intuitive and very close to our heart. I was actually thinking, how do we really describe today's world of geopolitics? There's so much that is changing and there's so much that has changed. In the early days, there's this very famous Urdu poet, Bashir Badr. He wrote a beautiful couplet. And I think there's nothing which is more profound than what it is today in the world order. And he said, Dushmani jamkar karo, and I'll translate it for you, John. Dushmani jamkar karo, lekin ye gunjaish rahe, jab kabhi hum dost ho jaएं to sharminda na ho. So it's like, pursue the enmity as much as you want, but keep a window open so that tomorrow, if we ever become friends, we shouldn't be embarrassed. That is something which is put to practice on every day in today's world, right? During COVID, when we used to do all these Zoom and Teams call and all of that, I remember somebody saying, and interestingly attributed to Lenin, I don't know how true it is, whether Lenin ever said this. He said there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decade happens. I think we are living through some of those weeks as we sit here and give our this discussion. Obviously, a 55 or 52 minutes is not enough to solve the world problems, but at least this is enough to get to understand it better. To discuss this topic, we could not have asked for a better panel than this, probably. And I say it even at the cost of modesty, that this is probably the brightest mind of geopolitics and diplomacy that you can get in this country. So thank you very much for each one of you to have come here. You know the panel already, Ambassador Ajay Bisaria. More than anything else, his book is far more relevant today in the anger management, the amount of anger that moves around in this world. At this point in time, he's been the former High Commission to Canada and Pakistan. To his left is Ambassador Arun Singh. All of them are also our advisory board. Ambassador Arun Singh is former ambassador to the US, France, and Israel. And then we have Arijit, who will moderate the session, my colleague. Ambassador Navdeep, who's been the ambassador to Egypt and UAE. To his left is Prabal. Everybody knows his commentary. He's been one of the most sane voice in all of these issues that really we all grapple with. And Deepshikha will give the vote of thanks. So without any further ado, over to you, Arijit, to take the session forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Ishteyaque. In China, it's considered not a blessing if somebody tells you, may you live in interesting times. We are Indians. For us, it's a much more pragmatic approach, thankfully. The session, when I first looked at it and it talked about the elephant, I was wondering whether the nation still behaves like one. The world has been perceiving that India has been for a while, a very steady, slow, plodding growth engine, which doesn't really change directions too swiftly. But that was an India of the past. The country is now a very different animal, and if we have to stay with the analogy of the elephant, I would say it's an elephant on steroids. And, with that, I would ask, and I'd get out of the way as swiftly as possible because there are far more knowledgeable people on this dais. To throw the first opening statement, how can India strategically navigate the current intersection between geopolitics and geoeconomics to strengthen its own global positioning? And perhaps this is all the more relevant at this point in time, given the recent events that have unfolded over the past month, month and a half. So maybe first, Ajay, would you like to take a shot at this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Arijit. You know, I would say this is the era of the revenge of geopolitics, because geopolitics is back. And we had been lulled into feeling that it was a world of geoeconomics, the WTO mattered, and a rules-based trade and economic order would be what would drive the world. But, you know, guess what? It's changed. And I think if we kind of segue from the first session where Minister Ashwini Vaishnav was talking about India's growth ambitions and the trajectory India has to take, one important factor for us is that our growth, or from now on, is going to be given a lot of global disruptions and global headwinds. Compare it to China's, which was at a time of global tailwinds in the 80s and 90s. And that is true for the country, and that is true for businesses. But I think the volatility is also an opportunity, because if we look at the kind of disruptions we've had post-Cold War in multiple domains, you know, we talk of technology, we talk of climate change, we talk of geoeconomics and geopolitics, but that disruption is this year on steroids, because the Trumpian revolution means that the geoeconomics and geopolitics is dramatically changing on a daily, if not an hourly basis. And what we have is a situation that we have to navigate multiple geopolitical storms of tariffs and otherwise, and also deal with a world where we have two ongoing conflicts and essentially a number of powers challenging the order that we knew, which was the US-led liberal global order, is being challenged by China, but also by Russia, and in the Middle East, perhaps by Iran. So I think it is a world of huge geopolitical flux, which impacts us in every domain.
Thank you for that. And Arun, would you have comments from your end on?
Yeah, building on what Ishteyaque and Ajay have said, I think one, of course, US and India at the moment are trying to seize the window that you spoke about. And in my nearly 5 decades of observing or being involved on foreign policy issues, this is one of the major inflection points that's happening globally, and we all have to be prepared for it. Now, while Europe, Japan, others are important players, the real contestation is happening between Russia, China, and the United States. Now, as far as India is concerned, Russia is a very important defense partner, now an important energy partner. But in the civilian areas of economy and technology, it doesn't have the strengths or the consumer market that India needs to meet its own aspirations. Now, China is the second largest economy globally, perhaps the largest in PPP terms. China is the largest trading partner of more than 100 countries in the world. The latest ranking of top 10 universities in the world shows that 7 or 8 of the top 10 universities are Chinese universities. And then if you look at technology development happening, including in the critical and emerging areas, patents being filed, China is in the lead in many areas. So there is no option for India but to engage somewhat with the tech ecosystem of China. But even as you do that, there will be huge security concerns, because that will give China leverage that you'll have to deal with. And more than that, there are security-related challenges embedded in many of the technologies of today. So that's something that government and industry have to figure out. So given all this, the United States will remain a necessary partner for India in terms of the civil defense, of course, but also in the civilian areas of technology, in critical and emerging technologies. Now, and US has been India's largest trading partner. India has a trade surplus with the US, despite being an overall trade deficit country. Bilaterally, US is the largest investor in India. Indian companies have invested more than $40 billion in the US economy, have a presence across all 50 states. At 5.4 million, the Indian origin diaspora is the largest single country presence of Indian origin diaspora. So it's a necessary partner. But the challenge is that for a long time in India, there has been a perception that US is an unreliable and coercive partner. And over the last 25 years, US was gradually moving away from that. But what has happened since May has once again resurrected in India the sense that the US can be an unreliable and coercive partner. And how do you deal with that? But if you see how the dynamic has played out, we have to keep in mind that the United States is more than any one president. And it's more than just President Trump. And the challenges we have faced have not been due to any fundamental issues or structural issues between US and India, but they have been due to the politics of President Trump. And as I see it, 4 elements of President Trump's own politics, domestic politics, have brought us to this point. One, that he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. So when Op Sindoor happened, he felt that his claim to mediating the ceasefire would enhance his claims for the Nobel Peace Prize. And obviously that ran into conflict with India's firm position that there is no scope for any third party in India-Pakistan issues. And so till May, all the messaging from the US was positive. After May, it starts getting negative. And on 17 June, President Trump spoke to the Indian Prime Minister when he was in Canada for the G7 and invited him to visit Washington. And everybody knew that on 18 June, he was inviting the Pakistan Army chief to the White House for lunch. So probably he wanted to ambush the two with a photo op in the White House. And that's obviously something that Indian prime ministers cannot accept. So you see some irritation coming in. Then if you see the trade agreement, from all accounts, a good, balanced trade agreement had been worked out between the two countries. And by early July, and it was ready to be taken forward. But just at that time, President Trump was in a position to signal domestically that he was getting unilateral concessions from other partners. Indonesia and Vietnam completely opened up their markets, still got 20% tariffs. Europe promises to invest $600 billion in the US, $750 billion of energy purchases, gets 15% tariffs. Japan promises to invest $550 billion, and US says that this is their sovereign wealth fund. And President Trump will decide where it will be invested, and 90% of profits generated after a while will go to the United States. So these were seen as unilateral concessions that he was getting because Indonesia and Vietnam were export dependent on the US, and Japan and Europe were security dependent on the US for their own security. And so they're getting, and so he was not able to project that he was getting unilateral benefit from the Indian deal. Then after that, on Russia-Ukraine conflict, he said that he will resolve the issue in 24 hours. And then he was coming under criticism for not taking action against Russia. Because if you see, since he became president, there's no action against Russia. And so he was being criticized for that. So they decided to levy tariffs on India. Because after that, when the Polish president was visiting, a journalist asked President Trump that you said you'll resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but you have taken no action against Russia. He said, no, I've taken action against India for buying oil from Russia. And the final thing was that a lot of people in the US have argued that he has no authority to levy tariffs, belongs to US Congress. The matter has gone to courts. Courts have ruled that so far that he does not have the authority. It has now gone to Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court filing, there's a specific paragraph that they have levied tariff on India to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict, trying to show that he's using tariff for foreign policy purposes and foreign policies in the mandate of US president. So we faced a particular situation because of the politics of Donald Trump, not because of structural issues between US and India. And that's why we will come out of it at some stage. There will be debris. In India, people will say, look, even if you have to build with the US, diversify more, hedge more. So that will be one thing. And finally, even as you buy more and more defense equipment from the US, which you must, some of it is best from there, make sure that you're not security dependent on the United States. So I think both will take away from some lessons, and it will all play out in the geopolitics and geoeconomics going further from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Arun. Let me add a little bit more masala into the mix. Navdeep, from the perspective of, away slightly shift from China and the US, we have been seeing that the Middle East has been positioning itself as the the bank for the world, the capital generator for the world. What are your thoughts on how that angle might play out given the current scenario?
Thanks. After listening to Arun's exposition in particular, I wanted to say that every morning I wake up resentful about the extent of my mind space that President Trump occupies, and I'm determined to shun. like you wake up thinking, what has he done today? What has he said today, right? And I think we need to insulate ourselves from that to retain our sanity, consistency, predictability of our own actions rather than just reacting to everything that he says. I think we are stuck for 3.5 years unless there's something dramatic that happens in the midterm elections and so on, which is why I choose to focus on other areas, the Gulf in particular. But even before I come to the Gulf, I think we also would be remiss if we didn't refocus on Europe. I'm very happy that the free trade agreement with Europe has legs. I think we were making a mistake for a while last couple of years when we were being overly dismissive about old Europe and trying to create distinctions between old Europe and new Europe and so on. I think that was a bit of short-termism from our side. So it's good to see that we are again recognizing that Europe will remain central to our capital, technology, and other requirements. But on the Gulf, as we're meeting here today, Minister Piyush Goyal is in Abu Dhabi, leading the Indian team for the high-level task force on investment. His counterpart, I think this is the 17th iteration of that, and his counterpart consistently over that period has been the managing director of the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, Sheikh Hamid bin Zayed Al Nahyan. ADIA, for those who may not know, has $1 trillion in assets. And the 3 big sovereign funds of Abu Dhabi alone, we are not talking about the others, are about $1.7 trillion. So Abu Dhabi has positioned itself of late as the capital of capital. And I really think we need to understand, while Dubai is the sexy, seductive younger sister, but really the action in many ways is in Abu Dhabi and in Riyadh, where the change, the scale on which change is taking place really deserves to be understood far better than we do. And while the big 5 or 10 Indian companies are trying to engage with ADQ and ADIA and Mubadala and IHC and some of the other big funds in terms of accessing their capital. I was in Abu Dhabi last month and I had a big, very substantive meeting with the managing director of ADQ. And he said, but where are the other Indian companies who need capital? Where are the bankable projects that can come to us, which we are looking to diversify away from the United States? They want to try and look at other places to park that capital and get decent returns. And I think there's work to be done on the Indian side on this. But I also want to take the conversation just beyond capital when we are looking at our own policy. Don't be surprised if in the next 5 years, UAE emerges as one of the leading destinations for AI, cloud computing, hypercloud, you name it. They are setting up a 5 gigawatt AI campus, which is going to be the largest outside the United States, fueled by their nuclear power, their solar energy, and gas. It includes a 1 gigawatt AI cluster with Microsoft, OpenAI, Oracle, Cisco, NVIDIA, and SoftBank. That's quite a cast of characters. And the reason I'm saying this is, if at some point the Indian tech sector, and this would have been relevant for the previous minister, the speaker, we will, if we need access to low-cost, mega-scale computing power, the chances are that you'll find it 3 hours away from here rather than at some distant shore. The other area which I would certainly look at from our biotechnology sector's point of view is this small country, there are only 1 million Emiratis, has done a genome database of 80% of its indigenous population. The opportunities that it is going to develop for predictive medicine or precision medicine are quite remarkable. And when you see the convergence of that massive computing power that they are putting in with the genome base that they have created, you know, look at the future of medicine, and I think it's something that our pharma companies in particular should be taking a good hard look at. M42, for example, has become out of nowhere the Middle East's largest healthcare provider, and it's worth looking at the plans that they have going forward. So I want to say that, you know, while we stuck with the volatility of the US and of the leader of the great free world, please focus elsewhere. There's abundant opportunity. Go to Riyadh. Last time I went there, I was astounded that every immigration officer, every check-in counter is staffed by a Saudi woman. They had a 28% target for women participation in the workforce by 2030. They've already gone past that. There is change happening on a scale which unless we shed our stereotypes, we won't really comprehend it. So I would say, spend part of your mind space on looking at the Gulf in particular, and not just let Trump drive our agendas. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Navdeep. Pranab, initial thoughts on how we can, as a nation, navigate through this quagmire?
I think you've had enough food for thought already. So I just realized that coming in at the end has its disadvantages as well. So, but here's the thing. We got the perspectives. These are all stalwarts who look at the world from their own perspective, but somebody who observes things from a distance. The way to understand, the way I find, and what is really the question, big question on the table is, how do we figure this thing out? How do we figure this unpredictability out? And my view is, and I think a lot of people over here might relate, we've always followed the stock exchange. I think it's important to look at, instead of getting into concepts like multipolarity or something like that, to look at the geopolitics in the form of a geopolitical stock exchange. It's a daily business. It goes up, just like any stock. Something goes up, something goes down, something is unpredictable, and you need to keep an eye on it, just like you keep an eye on stocks. And what does that mean? It means build in the right stakes, invest right, and like any market, when the chips are down, there's still an opportunity. So sell right. And that's I think, a better way. The key factor over here is, and which also reflects in some of the points Mr. Navdeep Suri made, there is everybody wants to do business with everybody. That's a big change in the way geopolitics is playing out today. It's not as if one superpower controls the actors and their actions. People are doing their own things. And it's not as if you had a bad day with Trump. You can't actually go out there and do business with and the other person won't do business with you because you have a bad day with Trump. It doesn't really work that way. So anybody is willing to do business with anybody in this stock exchange. The question is, are you willing to invest? Are you willing to build those stakes? Are you willing to play it right? So instead of, sort of opening up the umbrella and say, where's the rainfall? I think it's time to walk in the rain. I think that's one point, because it's not going to change. That's the way it is. The second thing is, I think this is something where we all say it often, but people often don't want to smell the coffee, is the rules with which business were done, they've changed and they're changing. The world trading order is not there. Why? Because people are using, countries are using economics as leverage, instrument of power. It started with China, which weaponized supply chains. Today you have Trump weaponizing trade and tariffs. If tomorrow India has leverage, we don't. But if we have leverage, why will we not use it? Other countries will use it. Everybody is trying to build that leverage because that's the new currency of power. And business and economics will get weaponized. Many of you might feel that you're getting weaponized. And because of the way geopolitics is going to play out, and the fact that there is no agreed rule-based order that's going to operate. It's going to be deals. And it's better to understand that early enough. Third point is, I think the key word is for me at least, is building redundancies. It's important for anybody doing business, just like countries, you need to have options. The one who's best layered is best suited up for this combat. More layers you build in, whether you people call in different industries, you call it layers to supply chains, layers to technology providers, layers to whatever, options. And it's important to invest in options. Just like India is realizing as a country, companies will also have to figure out that, invest in more and more options. I think that's going to be a big distinguishing factor. And finally, and this is a point which I like making because I'm a student of politics. A lot of geopolitics is also, use this word very fancily, it comes out from the Cold War era and before. It's actually, today's geopolitics is driven a lot by domestic politics. The intersection between domestic and global geopolitics and international relations, it's a sieve, it keeps going up and down. And if you don't figure out domestic politics of countries and geographies, you will not be able to figure out how their actions will be on the world stage. I mean, what is Trump? It's domestic politics. A lot of China was driven by domestic politics. So it's this investment in domestic politics, actually getting out there and understanding what's driving politics at the ground level is no longer a hobby, but an essential item for business. I think investing in that becomes very, very important. So I just wanted to put these three trend lines as we talk about the elephant or whosoever navigating geopolitics, that this is the world we live in. And perhaps we can have much better ideas, but the world is not going to change. It's going to move in this particular direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pranab. And to show how well PAFI takes feedback, we will now start with you first. And so, very interestingly, one of the comments that you made led me to this question, that India is now perhaps at its most influential in terms of how it can navigate through the geopolitical waters. But are we leveraging our strengths and our influence enough? Is there something more that we could be doing? Over to you.
There are many people in this panel who can tell us what we should be doing, but as you say, there is another view which you walk around the city and you say, oh, India is isolated. There's nobody, the Americans are not doing business with us. We have problems with the Chinese. So I think it's a question of understanding the change. As I come back to my last point, understanding the change in India to understand your strengths. What is the significant thing that has changed about India. From the time I started my reporting career, we were schooled and trained in covering coalition governments. Today, you get up and say, what is Trump going to do? We used to actually get up and think, Sarkar rahegi ki nahi? Instability, and I've had many government officials tell us, even people in MEA, India's political instability is our biggest weakness. And people don't want to do business with us because they don't know if this government will stay tomorrow, whether the policy predictability is there in Indian politics or not. Guess what? It's there today. The big change in India is political stability has come from nowhere. So your biggest strength is today political stability in a world where there is political instability in many other countries, even if you look at many of the European powerhouses. So I think if you leverage your political stability, that's one. Two, I think you have to look at new businesses. I think just few family businesses, world is moving beyond that. Leverage your tech strength. And for that, it is important, I think, for business and tech to work with government. A lot of that is not happening. Where you can leverage your own tech, if you look at semiconductors, you looked at the study and said, oh, we are not there in the supply chain, we are not there. But guess what? When you looked at the R&D labs, it's filled with Indian minds. Even till date, we don't know how to reach out to them. And we don't know what to do to make them assets for India. So I think that leverage, that tech leverage, which is very important, I think, to do. And finally, I think there has to be more risk appetite built into our businesses. I frankly think scalability is directly proportional to risks we take. And still now, I find that businesses say government should take a lead. I think business-led government actions ke bhi din aa gaye hain. And I think not every time, but on many occasions that is possible. Because for many things, I think government is also looking for answers to the business side. So I think these are opportunities which can be leveraged.
Thank you. Thank you. So, just to pass the baton to you, Navdeep, from your perspective and your, domain of strength, what do you feel could be perhaps some of the more forward-looking partnerships or policy changes that could help us to gain better traction with the Middle East and with the Gulf?
On your previous question, one of my favorite teachers always used to give me a grade which was can do better, which I thought is a good way to keep you from getting complacent, right? There's always room to improve. So while, yes, we've done very well, but I think beyond patting ourselves on the back, we need to see what else we can do better and differently. At a more general level, I serve on the advisory board of a tech fund in Bangalore. And so a couple of their companies were saying that the kind of resumes that they are getting from the United States these days are mouth-watering. These are PhDs and postdoctoral fellows and at the cutting edge of science. And if ever India were to have a window of opportunity to attract back some of that talent, I think this is the window when the US government is cutting down funding to some of its best research institutions. And some of that talent has already started flowing in the direction of Canada and Europe. I think we need to be part of that equation, and we really need to move fast and in a very cohesive, concerted manner. We do have a fund which is supposed to do this. This is the time to activate it and really get something going. On the second thing which we could do differently, I think we should be mindful that while we treat Indian diaspora as a big asset and a big strength across the world, not just the remittances that come from the Gulf or the United States, but also in terms of the real bridge that they build between India and the countries in which they are. I think we should be mindful that some of the polarizations from India also get transmitted into the diaspora. So, you know, the more cohesive we are at home, the greater will be the influence of the diaspora overseas. And I've seen bits and pieces of that in play, that one intemperate comment in India can create shockwaves across communities elsewhere. So I think this is something that we can certainly be much more careful. A final point on the Middle East, I would say, is, you know, Prime Minister Modi has invested enormous energy into building our relations with the Gulf in particular. There is a natural convergence with the moderate Gulf states in terms of anti-radicalization, opposition to extremist ideologies, the fight against terrorism in its various formats and so on. Look at one metric. Mr. Modi has visited Abu Dhabi 7 times during the course of the last few years. How many other countries have been beneficiaries? Yesterday, Burj Khalifa was lit up saying happy birthday to Prime Minister Modi. You know, happy 75th. And that's just maybe just symbolic, but I want to say that, you know, the geopolitics is remarkably favorable. It's a country that stood with us when we revoked Article 370. On major issues of concern to us geopolitically, they stand increasingly with us. We need to now translate that into the economic side. And I think this is where the government has done its bit. The business needs to be more cognizant about the opportunities that exist. When I was ambassador in Egypt, I tried everything that I could to get Indian IT companies to come to Egypt. But you know, 70% of their revenue comes from US. So today when you say, I'm in a risky situation, well, what stopped you from diversifying a situation where 70% of your market is US and another 20% is Europe? There's the rest of the wide world beyond even the Anglophone world, which is awaiting you, waiting to welcome you, and you miss that opportunity. So I think there's stuff that our industry can do, IT sector, pharma sector can do to really spread the wings wider.
Thank you. Thank you, Navdeep. You know, Arun, from your perspective, you know, and I say this because I come from, at this point in time, a Chinese company, and we have had a very interesting last 2.5 years. We find a small window which has opened up, not because of us, but because of the situation that prevails currently, for a certain amount of, you know, hope to again get rekindled. From your perspective, so from your perspective, do you see this window being utilized in a suitable manner, or do you feel that this is something that may not last for much longer?
So I think we'll have to wait and see. Part of it, of course, will also depend on the Chinese, because for the reason you described, there is a certain opening of the window, and for whatever reports and past sort of behavior from our neighbor, it would be clear that they would also see why the window is opening, and perhaps they would assess that there is a moment of vulnerability, and they would want to leverage that for their own advantage. So I think we'll have to see how this iterative process works out, that if India is now willing to open a little bit more, what is the leverage the Chinese try to build? And again, there have been reports that they pulled away a certain number of engineers, they're allowing joint ventures in certain areas, in other areas they're blocking technology transfers, they're clamping down on rare earths, magnets and other areas. So I think it will be an iterative process. India will want to retain advantage for itself. The Chinese would want to enhance their coercive power vis-a-vis India through this process. And so how that leads. I think for India, the challenges, and there's a lot of achievement and various things that you mentioned, that we also face huge challenges. I mean, our neighbor, an adversarial neighbor, is a country with 4 or 5 times our GDP, and 4 or 5 times India's military expenditure. So that's something to watch. We have a very strong partnership with Russia and a historical, confident partnership. But our relationship with Russia is complicating our relations with Europe, complicating our relations with the United States because of the approach that they have taken. And the challenge related to the US is that the more and more you do with the US, the more and more normal expectation in US is that when they decide to do something, their partner should immediately fall in line. Now, that's not going to happen in India, because India will take decisions based on its own assessments of its own interest. And the US system has to get used to accepting a partner, not an ally. And the US system is normally not able to do that, because everybody says that the most complicated negotiating process in the US is the interagency process. And through their battles, they come with a decision, and then they decide all their partners must fall in that decision. But that's not going to work. So I think these are challenges that we'll face. And ultimately, the best way to come out of it is to build your own economic and technological strength through partnerships, so that you have enhanced independent capacity and you have your own system of leverages. Thank you.
Thank you. And, for Ajay, from your perspective, and you have held some of the, most challenging geopolitical areas during your tenure. Do you think that given the shift that is happening and the polarization that is taking place, there is any room for us to become closer with any of our neighbors?
Well, I think the neighborhood is a completely different challenge, and yet it's part of the same piece. The same geopolitical flux we are talking of has created this age of uncertainty, this age of fear, and a great deal of ferment in our neighborhood. So, you've seen these youth-led anti-establishment kind of movements, but at the root of it, it is an age of anger, an age of uncertainty about what is happening, and a lot of fear that drives it. But the way India is playing it as the island of relative stability in a sea of ferment is to manage the situation in the neighborhood. And that would mean, having asymmetric relationships, neighborhood first, dealing in a non-ideological kind of way, helping the neighborhood, and recognizing that there's serial ferment from Sri Lanka to Bangladesh to Nepal and so on, and dealing with it in a way that is going to be helpful. The two traditional adversaries aren't going anywhere. Yet that is also a situation where India is looking for a sort of tactical adjustment with China, as also with Pakistan. So along with an escalation instinct when we face a security challenge, there is a strong de-escalation instinct. I don't want my war to go on for more than 4 days and to have accomplished my goals, because I want to focus on my central mission, which is to grow at 6 to 9% for the next 25 years. So the neighborhood challenge is one to be managed. But the other opportunity, and we're talking of opportunities also in this ferment, is apart from the China +1 opportunity, I think we also have a US +1 opportunity and a Europe +1 opportunity. Because given volatility in these geographies, opportunities are coming up for India. For instance, the Canadians, which manage $2 trillion of assets among their pension funds, have 50 to 70% exposure in the US. And they're questioning why. They're questioning that exposure. So India becomes the natural kind of place to consider in Asia for some of these funds to be redeployed. And I think that is the direction for India. It is an opportunity to be lost. So what we need to do is reform, 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 and become that attractive destination which can take in this capital.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. We are sort of very fast running out of time. quickly 2 questions. I would request Major Ranjit Goswami, please.
Thank you, Ariji. It's interesting that, I chose to sit next to my friend from the US Embassy, Jonathan, and these panelists ended up remembering their president so fondly during the session. But nevertheless, we all spoke about, at length about China, US, and Navdeep did mention that we are in the whole, discussion missing out many of the younger siblings as well. We fail to acknowledge the, our discussions and ongoing deliberations with Asia, Pacific, and Africa, which to me or to many of us is equally important. There was a time when India used to remember them and discuss about our presence and our relationships in Africa and in Asia Pacific in a much bigger manner. Is there a change, or is it something that is just kind of not getting enough bandwidth right now?
Look, I think Africa does get a lot of attention. Japan, South Korea, Singapore do get a lot of attention. We engage with them at multiple platforms. It's just, as I said, the mind space that the current situation sucks, the oxygen that it sucks out, leaves you little elsewhere, especially in the public discourse. But believe me that, I've spent a lot of time working on Africa, and the kind of relationships that we have built over the years are there to stay. And there is a lot of opportunity in Africa, and I know that Ministry of Commerce in particular looks at it very closely.
So one last question, because we are already more than a minute up, and I can see Ajay and feel Ajay glaring at me. Vineet Abraham from DGA, you had a question. Vineet? Okay. Can someone get a mic to him? Okay. So it seems we've sort of... thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. It's time for the thank yous. I have to start by thanking all our panelists. You guys are just always so awesome and always make time for PAFI. We are really grateful for you to make that time and the kind of perspectives you bring to the table. Each one of you brought some very interesting quotable quotes. I could go through all of them, but I loved, Ajay, your point on the revenge of the geopolitics. And Ambassador Singh, of course, your whole point about let this current situation between India, US not be seen as something permanent, because obviously we are a very important partnership. Thank you so much, Navdeep. I love your points about let not Donald Trump take up so much mind space. Let's give some attention to a lot of the others in the Middle East and, of course, also in Asia-Pac and Africa and so on. Pranab, I think you summarized all that, and I like your bit about the geopolitical stock exchange. Very interesting. And stock exchange are all about volatility and how do you manage risk versus reward. And I think that's what all of us professionals in the public affairs community really need to look at and take advice, as you've talked about, and then go back to our organizations and talk about how do we manage this risk-reward equation and make the best of it. So thank you so much, and thank you again, Arijit, for doing a great job of the moderation, and Ishteyaque for the welcome. And now we'll move to the next session.
Please be seated.